Picture this. You wake up, morning light on your face. You stretch, you check your phone, and you remember, today is your 200th birthday. Not your great-great-grandmother's birthday. Yours. You're not in a hospital bed. You're not hooked up to machines, surrounded by relatives saying goodbye. You go for a run. You read the news. You're planning a trip you've wanted to take for the last 40 years, and you finally have the time and the knees for it. Sounds impossible? Maybe. But somewhere on this planet, right now, scientists are quietly trying to make that exact scenario real. And honestly, the strange part isn't whether it's possible. The strange part is what happens to everything else the moment it becomes possible. Your job, your marriage, your retirement, even the planet you're standing on. So today, we're going to ask the most dangerous question in biology. What if humanity actually cracked aging? What if 200 years stopped being science fiction and started being just an ordinary lifespan? Before we open this door, and fair warning, once we open it, there's no closing it again. If you're new here, this is the channel where we take one impossible question about the human body and follow it all the way to the edge, no matter how strange it gets. This video is part of our Human Body series, so if this is the kind of rabbit hole you enjoy falling into, go ahead and hit subscribe right now, because by the end of this one, you're going to want to see where else this series goes. Alright, let's open the door. Here's something most people never stop to ask. Why do we age at all? Not how. Why? Your body is, biologically speaking, a machine that rebuilds itself every single day. Your skin replaces itself roughly once a month. The lining of your gut renews itself within days. Even your bones are quietly being broken down and rebuilt for your entire life, like a city under permanent, invisible construction. So if your body is built to keep repairing itself, why does it eventually stop doing that job well? Scientists have a few answers, and none of them are simple. But let's break down the biggest ones in plain language. There are your telomeres, tiny protective caps on the ends of your DNA, a bit like the plastic tips on the ends of shoelaces. Every time a cell divides, those caps get a little shorter. Eventually, they get so short, the cell can't safely divide anymore, and it either dies or gets stuck. There are senescent cells, cells that should have died on schedule but didn't. Instead, they just sit there, refusing to leave, quietly leaking inflammation into the tissue around them, like a printer that's jammed but somehow still running, gumming up everything nearby. There's mitochondrial decline, the tiny power plants inside almost every one of your cells slowly losing efficiency, the way a phone battery holds less charge with every year you own it, until simple tasks start to drain you faster than they used to. And then there's a newer, stranger idea that's gaining serious traction. Aging might be, at its core, a loss of information. Not damage exactly, more like your cells slowly forgetting which type of cell they're supposed to be. Imagine a book whose pages were never torn out, just slowly smudged, until the words underneath become harder and harder to read. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. In several labs, researchers have already shown partial reversal of some of this in animals. Old mice regaining the muscle tone of young mice. Damaged optic nerves nudged into regrowing. Aged cells coaxed back toward a noticeably younger state, at least temporarily, at least in controlled conditions. We are nowhere near doing this safely in humans, not even close. But for the first time in the history of medicine, serious scientists have stopped asking, can we slow aging down a little? And started asking, could we, in principle, functionally stop it? So let's run the thought experiment. Let's say that somewhere in the next 50 to 80 years, someone actually figures it out. Let's say the average human lifespan stops being roughly 80 years. It becomes 200. Here's where this stops being exciting and starts being genuinely uncomfortable. Let's start with something that sounds boring on the surface and is absolutely terrifying underneath. Your retirement. Every pension system on Earth, every single one, public or private, is quietly built on one bet. The bet is this. Most people work for about 40 years, then live another 15 to 20 years in retirement, funded largely by the people still working. It's basically a relay race. The young carry the old, and when the young get old, the next generation picks up the baton and carries them. Now stretch that retirement phase from 20 years to 130 years. The relay race doesn't just slow down, it collapses. There simply isn't a young enough generation to carry that much weight for that long, especially since longer lifespans almost always come paired with falling birth rates, fewer young workers supporting more long-lived retirees for far, far longer. So what actually happens? A few brutal possibilities. Retirement at 65 quietly disappears. It might shift to 120. Or the entire concept of retiring might dissolve completely, replaced by something more like switching careers every 30 years, indefinitely, forever cycling between work, rest, and reinvention. Or pension systems as we know them simply break and get replaced by something closer to a personal, lifelong investment account. You fund your own 2 centuries, with the state stepping in only at the very end, if at all. Or, and this is the version that actually keeps economists up at night, society quietly splits in two. People wealthy enough to access life extension technology live, work, and accumulate wealth for 200 years. Everyone else doesn't get that option. The gap between rich and poor doesn't just widen, it compounds, generation after generation. Except now, there are no new generations stepping in to reset the board, because the old generation never leaves. Imagine a CEO who landed their first job in 1990, still running that same company in 2190, still making every major decision, still holding the wealth, never handing anything down because nothing is forcing the handoff anymore. That alone should make you a little uneasy, and we haven't even gotten to your love life yet. Here's a phrase you've heard 1,000 times. Till death do us part. It sounds romantic specifically because it's finite. It works on some level because it asks 2 people to commit to roughly 50 years together, give or take. 50 years is already hard. Now make it 150? Think about who you were 10 years ago, your taste, your politics, your sense of humor, what you actually wanted out of life. Now multiply that amount of change by 15. The person you marry at 25 might be, by year 150, someone you've grown apart from not once, but 5 or 6 separate times and grown back together with just as many times in cycles nobody alive today has ever had to navigate. Some sociologists who've actually speculated seriously about radical longevity think marriage, as a single unbroken lifelong contract, simply doesn't survive an extension like this. Instead, picture renewable marriage contracts, legally binding for 20, 30, or 50 years, with built-in options to renew, renegotiate the terms, or part ways with dignity instead of a courtroom battle. Family structures get strange too, in a way that's almost beautiful and almost overwhelming at the same time. Imagine being alive at the same time as your great-great-great-grandchildren. 5 living generations, sharing holidays, sharing the same family group chat for well over a century. Grandparents who aren't faded memories from childhood, but active, present people throughout your entire adult life. But here's the quieter, more unsettling question underneath all of this. If you never have to lose someone to time, does love start to feel less urgent? Does forever start to feel like devotion? Or does it start to feel like a sentence? Nobody actually knows the answer. No human society has ever had to find out, because no human society has ever been handed 200 years to test it. And it's not just romantic relationships that get stretched past recognition. Think about who you even are after 200 years. Right now, your identity is partly built on the fact that your story has a shape: childhood, career, family, old age, an ending. Psychologists sometimes call this a life narrative, the internal story you tell yourself about who you're becoming. What does that story even look like when it doesn't close after one career, one marriage, one set of friends, but after 5 or 6 of each? Are you still the same person who started that story? Or are you closer to several different people, wearing the same face, stacked on top of one another across 2 centuries? Some longevity researchers actually find this idea liberating. You get to fail spectacularly at one path and simply start a completely different one, with almost no shame attached, because you've got 150 years left to make up for it. Others think it's the opposite, an exhausting, never-ending obligation to keep reinventing yourself with no graceful exit, ever, because the story never gets permission to close. And speaking of things no human society has ever had to deal with, let's talk about the planet itself. Here's the math that keeps demographers awake at night. Right now, global population grows because birth rates run slightly higher than death rates. It's a simple balance, and in plenty of countries, it's already starting to tip the other way. Fertility rates are falling almost everywhere, and several nations already record more deaths than births in a given year. Now imagine death rates suddenly collapse, while birth rates stay roughly where they are. The population doesn't just grow steadily, it stacks. Picture a swimming pool where normally water drains out about as fast as it flows in from the tap. A 200-year average lifespan doesn't just slow the drain, it nearly seals it shut, while the tap keeps running exactly as before. If nothing else changes, that means a planet trying to feed, house, and employ a population that simply never thins out the way it used to. Every extra decade of healthy life is, in a very real sense, another decade where that same person is still using housing, still eating food, still drawing on energy and space that has to come from somewhere. There are a few realistic ways this could play out. 1. Birth rates fall even further, almost out of necessity, sometimes through outright policy, sometimes just through shifting culture, leaving a planet of mostly older, far more experienced, but considerably fewer new people. 2. Humanity finally gets serious about expanding outward. Orbital habitats, lunar settlements, eventually permanent footholds on Mars, not as a science fiction fantasy, but as an actual, practical pressure valve for a population that has stopped naturally thinning out. 3. And this is the option almost nobody wants to say out loud. Access to life extension gets rationed. Not handed to everyone equally. Maybe earned, maybe purchased, maybe assigned by lottery, the same way organ transplants are rationed today. Except now it isn't one organ on the line. It's potentially 120 extra years of someone's life. And the moment you phrase it that way, the conversation stops being about biology entirely. It becomes about who exactly gets to decide who keeps living. Here's the twist almost nobody considers when they picture living forever. We tend to assume more time automatically means more progress, more scientists working longer, more inventors inventing longer, humanity simply solving its problems over a longer runway. But there's a darker possibility hiding right underneath that assumption. What if a meaningful share of human progress has always depended on the old making room for the new? Not because older people stopped being capable, but because every generation that eventually passes also takes its outdated ideas, its old grudges, and its old hierarchies along with it. If the people running governments, companies, and universities in 2026 are still running them in 2226, same instincts, same blind spots, just 2 more centuries of compounded power and habit, does humanity actually move forward faster? Or does it just freeze in place, governed by the same minds for 200 uninterrupted years? That's the real question hiding underneath this entire video. It was never really, what if we lived to 200? It's, what kind of species would we have to become to actually deserve that much time? So here's where I land on this, and I'm genuinely curious where you land too. If humanity ever does crack a 200-year lifespan, it almost certainly won't look like the golden age we picture in the movies. It will be messier than that, a fight over who gets access first, a complete redesign of how marriage and family even work, a quiet collapse and rebuild of every pension system on the planet, and a population question that gets harder, not easier, with every extra healthy decade we hand ourselves. But maybe that's not a reason to fear it. Maybe that's simply the cost of admission for a species that finally learns how to outpace its own biology. If this is the kind of question that gets your brain running in 6 directions at once, that's exactly what this channel is built for. This video is part of our Human Body series, where we take the science of your own body and push it as far as it can possibly go. And trust me, the rest of that playlist only gets stranger from here. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let me know in the comments. 200 years, yes or no? Would you actually take it? I'll see you in the next one.